So I guess we will get started, and I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming everyone. Sorry, I'm just also navigating the screen here. So welcome everyone to this sixth live panel discussion of the 2022 Adams Sustainability Celebration. Please note that this event will be recorded for distribution through various U of T outlets, and all participants agree to the possibility of appearing on these recordings by virtue of attending. And I think Alan has already hit the record function. The celebration, of course, is a tribute to the growing community of sustainability-minded students, faculty, and staff at University of Toronto, hosted by the Committee on the Environment, Climate Change, and Sustainability, or the CECCS, and made possible by generous donations from Wendy Adams. The purpose of this event series is to celebrate successes, inspire new activities, build relationships, and collaboratively deepen campus engagement around sustainability. Today, we're very excited to be discussing U of T's community of practice on sustainability pedagogy. So my name is Michael Claessens, and I'll be one of two moderators for this event, along with Hilary Inwood. I'm an assistant professor in the School of the Environment and the coordinator of the Certificate in Sustainability. Dr. Hilary Inwood is a faculty member at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, and she leads their Sustainability and Climate Action Network. She teaches a range of courses at OASE, including environmental and sustainability education, fundamentals of teaching and art education, and she also leads a national network dedicated to embedding environmental and sustainability education into teacher education across the country. So I want to thank everyone for coming and quickly just go over some Zoom etiquette, as you know we're wont to do in these instances. So, of course, if there's any inappropriate verbal or written communication, individuals will be removed from the session. And we're asking that, as a community, we hold each other accountable for maintaining a space of safety, accountability, and respect. If you have any questions for the panelists, please type them into the chat. And note that we might not be able to get to all of them depending on how much time we have. So some questions may be answered sort of in tandem or sort of grouped together. So once again, thanks so much for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Hilary now for the land acknowledgement.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you for that lovely introduction as well. I've been experimenting with art-based land acknowledgements as a way, as Michael said, I'm an art educator, so as a way to bring the works and the voices of Indigenous artists to the fore. So I'll start with a traditional land acknowledgement, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the piece that you're looking at currently. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory upon which the University of Toronto is situated. For thousands of years, the Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Seneca, and most recently, of course, the Mississaugas of the Credit have sought to walk gently on this land. This territory is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, as well as by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabeg and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the lands and resources around the Great Lakes. This acknowledgement begins this webinar, and it signals our desire to seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land, one based on honor and deep respect. It's really just, though, a starting point, a way to remind us all to enact this work of decolonization and reconciliation in our personal and professional lives. And one of the ways that I do that is by embedding Indigenous art into many of the events that I lead at OASE and beyond. So this particular mural you're looking at was created by multidisciplinary artist K-Rock, who's a member of Nipissing First Nation. K-Rock's visual art includes large street art projects like this one, as well as small works on campus, on canvas, and draws from both Anishinaabe culture and daily urban interactions. This piece is in fact located on the north face of the Daniels building at 1 Spadina Crescent, which is the home to one of our panelists I'll introduce you to in just a minute. It symbolizes the 7 grandfather teachings of humility, courage, honesty, wisdom, truth, respect, and love. And it features both grandfather sun and grandmother moon to represent the connection to Turtle Island, the Water Nation, and Mother Earth. And at the center, which is shaded with the colors of traditional medicine wheels, children are carried by eagles to the spirit world. And this design honors the 215 children whose unmarked graves were discovered at the site of a former residential school in Kamloops, BC. And of course, well, it's the graves that continue to be uncovered across Turtle Island. So thank you to K-Rock for starting us off with this absolutely beautiful mural today. Now, just to tell you a little bit about the panel, the University of Toronto's Community of Practice on Sustainability Pedagogy seeks to address how faculty can accelerate the shift towards sustainability in their work as scholars and as educators. Today's panelists, myself included, are involved in facilitating this COP, this Community of Practice, and we'll discuss a little bit about the COP's plans and our first steps towards working together on how to engage faculty in collaboratively deepening their sustainability practices in their courses, their pedagogy, and their programs. We will also consider how the COP can support the needs of faculty across U of T's 3 campuses, and we're hoping that you're going to join us in that discussion as we proceed in today's webinar. We welcome your questions that we can address as the webinar progresses in the chat, and we'll also be using a Jamboard a little bit later on to collect your ideas on this as well. And I would just like to reiterate our appreciation for all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to come and join us for today's event. Certainly a central goal at U of T is to make sustainability a really central aspect of our identity, and your participation and engagement in this is really key. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to my fellow panelists. I made mention that Liat Margulis is with us today and is in fact an occupant of that builder, a leader in that building, in fact, that I've just introduced you to with K-Rock's artwork on it. Liat is an associate professor of landscape architecture at the Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design. She's also director of the faculty's Master of Landscape Architecture program. She's chair of the committee on, she's chair of the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee, excuse me, on the CECCS, and we're happy to have her here with us. I just want to make mention that Nicole Spiegelar is also a member of our group, but she's not able to join us today. She's an assistant prof with Trinity College and the School of the Environment, and she's also the associate director of Trinity's Integrated Sustainability Initiative, and we look forward to having her back to join us for future events. And then finally, I'd also like to introduce you to Sarah Urquhart, who is a doctoral student at OISE as well at the University of Toronto. She's a doctoral student in the Curriculum and Pedagogy program. And I really had the pleasure of getting to know Sarah a little bit better this year because she's been working with our Sustainability and Climate Action Network. And we have brought her into the community of practice working as a graduate assistant. Sarah has got a lot of experience teaching environmental ed. She's taught in K-12 schools internationally. And she also teaches additional qualification courses for teachers, which is a form of in-service training for teachers here in the province of environmental ed as well. So Nicole, lovely to have you here. So with that, we can advance. Turn it over to Leah. Oh, sorry, excuse me, back to Michael.
Yeah.
Then we're gonna go to Leah, yeah.
Thanks, Hillary. Yeah, so we thought that we would start off by just talking a bit about the kind of starting points for this community of practice. And one of the ways that I've been thinking about it is that there was a kind of discontiguous momentum happening around campus, and that through kind of serendipity, I think it sort of coalesced into what you see before you today. There were discussions in the School of the Environment, before my time. I'm fairly new, but there was a general kind of dissatisfaction with sustainability as a term. Some people have felt that maybe it's lost some of its heft and meaning in some ways. But there was a desire to kind of rescue the term, to sort of scrutinize it, and to re-engage with it, maybe in a more sort of critical way. This led more recently to a bit of funding through the Pedagogical Innovation and Experimentation Fund. And this application was submitted with Nicole Spiegelar to develop a project that we've titled Toward Transformative Sustainability Pedagogy. So what we're attempting to do with this project is to curate a series of discussions that really kind of scrutinize sustainability, again, in a kind of critical way, to help us better understand, what are the sort of boundaries of sustainability? What are the barriers to sustainability, along, various sort of metrics, including, for example, gender, equity, et cetera. And how can we sort of maybe develop a more capacious, but also kind of appropriately scoped notion of sustainability, and then of course how do we then relate that to teaching and learning? At the same time, of course, there were internal discussions going on at OISE through Hillary's work with the Sustainability and Climate Action Network, also kind of struggling with these same ideas. And then, of course, there's been initiative of the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee of the CECCS as well. And so these three things were sort of happening, simultaneously, although not in coordination. And so, again, through kind of serendipity and trying to sort of reach through sort of institutional silos, we've found ourselves now working, collaboratively, and it's very exciting because to find sort of fellow travelers in other sort of units across university has been, I think, very empowering. And we're sort of at the beginning of this journey, I think, but we're quite excited to be sort of kicking things off, and of course thrilled to have the opportunity to share a bit of our journey and engage others in it through this Adams sustainability discussion. So that's just a brief bit of background. I think Hilary is going to chat a bit more about some of the goals as we see them at this point for the community of practice.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I've really been thrilled to find you and Nicole and Leah so early on in our process. We do have our own sustainability and climate action plan at OISE. And one of the actions is to more deeply embed notions of transformative approaches to sustainability pedagogy into the work that we do. So, so to find a group that we can take this right across campus at the same time as exploring these concepts at OISE is fabulous. Certainly, we've got a couple of goals for this COP. One of them is to bring U of T faculty together to discuss not only the what, but also the how that we teach sustainability. And that can be challenging in an institution that typically has its sort of standard approaches to pedagogy in higher education. And so even in our very first meeting, I think many of us were thrilled to get together with others who are already doing work in the area, but to have a conversation around how we can advance the work together was really exciting for many of us. Certainly a second goal is to define and analyze sustainability pedagogy, as Michael had said, across our programs, across our faculties, and across campuses. It's not often that we get opportunities to sit and talk with other faculty members outside of our own programs. So to do that, when we all feel so passionate about sustainability, embedding the curriculum of sustainability in our courses, but also really trying to align how we teach our courses so that we're not just simply replicating the same kind of colonial practices that have been in place for, in some cases, hundreds of years in terms of teaching in higher ed. So we're looking at how we do this, not only in our courses, potentially developing new courses, but also embedding this into our existing courses. Also thinking about it in terms of our program development, and the Sustainability Pathways program is certainly one way to do that. And I know that there's been a previous Adams webinar on that very topic. But also in how we can really truly engage our students in learning. And sometimes that happens best outside of our courses. So doing that through co-curricular, or some people would call that extracurricular learning, and also engaging them in action around sustainability. And I think for many of us, students and faculty alike, that's what gives us a sense of hope that we can actually move forward and deal with the climate crisis in ways that will continue to let the earth be a livable place for all living beings. And then finally, another goal is just to really, as Michael had said a little bit before, is not just to accept sustainability and the discourse that's happening around it, but to critique it and to reimagine the ways in which we can teach sustainability in our classes in more transformative and intersectional ways. And what that looks like is what we'll be unpacking as the COP continues to sort of form and then develop over the next year or two. So with that, the work has been grounded, no doubt, in the work of the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee. So I'm going to turn it over to Leah to introduce a little bit about that.
Thanks, Hilary. I thought we would provide a little bit of background for the CECS for those who are unfamiliar, and also the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee and how that's evolved in terms of the frameworks and how we're thinking about overlapping our efforts with the COP. So as many of you know, the Presidential Advisory Committee on the Environment, Climate Change and Sustainability, in short ECCS, was established in 2017 following the Beyond Divestment report. And excitingly, it includes a really broad membership of faculty, staff, and students that represent a very broad range of programs and disciplines, and across the 3 campuses. And the Teaching and Learning Subcommittee, which, as mentioned, I've been chairing for the past few months, is one of 4 interlinked subcommittees, including research, operations, and engagement and partnerships. And the T&L subcommittee focus is to support the development of sustainability curriculum pathways for every undergraduate student across the campus. And it also provides guidance on instilling sustainability in community engaged learning initiatives and student workshops. So that's been really the kind of work that we've been doing for the last 4 years in supporting the development and adoption of sustainability pathway programs across the university. And these are clusters of courses and co-curricular activities with common themes of sustainability that allow students to explore sustainability from various disciplines, methodological point of view, and practical perspectives. And the aim of the sustainability pathway is to develop and offer these curricular and co-curricular pathways to all undergraduate students with the ambition eventually to have 90% of the undergraduate cohort partaking in sustainability pathways, is to have the opportunity to incorporate sustainability learning into their program, regardless of what degree program they're in, and also developing cross-cutting interdisciplinary skills. So the sustainability pathway comprises of a 3-tiered framework. The first is sustainability citizen, where a student completes a certain number of approved sustainability-oriented co-curricular activities, which are then recorded in the co-curricular record. The second is the sustainability scholar, where a student completes a certificate or minor in sustainability, which is then recorded on their transcript. And then a sustainability leader is where a student completes both citizen and scholar requirements and adds also an experiential learning capstone activity. And so to date, the sustainability pathway has been adopted in 4 units, which is really exciting: the Faculty of Architecture, Faculty of Engineering, Arts and Science, and UTSC. And UTM program is currently underway. And those largely have been framed under 4 cross-cutting themes, which are also the cross-cutting themes of the ECCS committee at large. The first is that the framework is, or the kind of the definition of sustainability follows the UN SDG goals. First, to orient our understanding across all of our activities of the various dimensions of sustainability across the campus. And secondly, to develop our sustainability inventories of courses. The second cross-cutting theme is campus as living lab. And this is really where we showcase the kind of intent to cross over between teaching, operations, and research. And so this is really thinking about opportunities for students to use the campus as a test bed for sustainability and connecting the kind of academic opportunities with operational activities and ambitions for decarbonizing our campus and reaching sustainability goals more broadly. The third theme is university's agent of change, which really thinks about the university within a larger community. What's our role in partnerships with off-campus organizations, public, private, civil society sectors, and so on. And then fourthly, and importantly, student leadership. What's the role of student engagement in sustainability governance, in publications, and thinking about their time at university and then beyond. So those frameworks, and particularly the UNSDG formed the kind of the framework for a large course inventory, which took place in parallel to the development of pathway programs. And within that inventory, we identified upwards of 3,000 courses across the university, existing courses that have sustainability content. And then finally, this is where we sort of came together with this reflection on the last 4 years. We've been really busy in establishing pathway programs and building this kind of groundswell across the campus. But at the same time, I think there was a consensus that there needs to be to have at the same time an evaluation of where we are today. What are these frameworks? Are they effective? How is sustainability defined, as was already highlighted by Michael and Hillary? How do we measure success? Are these programs and new courses having transformative impact? And it certainly became clear that with such a large campus or university that we have, and so many people working in their respective fields and departments, that we're really missing a forum for exchange among those who are developing these programs and delivering courses, and thinking about what are the kind of the conversations that need to happen in order to evaluate how effective we're being or where we're headed with sustainability pathways. So hence the overlap and really happy about that between the TNL subcommittee and the COP. And I'll hand it over now to Sarah.
Thank you, Liette. So I will be sharing a little bit today about our initial retreat for the community of practice. This took place in February, and actually I can see a few people that have joined us today that were part of that. So I think it's Maria, Ramila, and Blake, so welcome. But we did have representation from several different faculties, administrative departments across the University of Toronto campuses. And we held the sessions virtually, framing the conversations around the 4 guiding questions that you see here. So building on a lot of what's already been shared, we began with looking at the definitions. How do we personally define and practice sustainability, and what does that really look like in our work as an educator at the University of Toronto? It was recognized that some people identify sustainability and define sustainability in similar ways to the United Nations, but looking at social, economic, and environmental aspects. Or others recognize that there are needs for additional perspectives. Some people spoke about equity and justice as needing to frame conversations about sustainability. And others identified the need for Indigenous worldviews to guide understandings of sustainability. There were conversations in response to this first question around educating students for hope and not getting too bogged down in narratives of doom and gloom. But at the same time, also some of the responsibility that educators felt to look at developing a critical consciousness for students. So yes, even though this is a contested term, as Michael indicated, really digging deep into that conversation, what are we sustaining, and working through the fact that we don't want to be sustaining a status quo that has been detrimental and problematic, but looking for opportunities to reclaim sustainability as something that can be transformative and regenerative. So then our next conversation, question 2, was looking at how does that framing, how do our definitions really inform our teaching? And I think there are a lot of commonalities, even though people are teaching in many different faculties and many different disciplines, recognizing that there's a lot of shared values. So looking at concepts like interconnection, reciprocity, the need to develop relationship as fundamental in informing teaching. And that this is not just something that needs to be an add-on into courses, but it really needs to be a foundational piece that is going to shape the experience for students, about changing mindsets and not just a little piece tacked onto a course. We took a break at that point because that was already some very rich discussion. And then we came back in the afternoon to address questions 3 and 4 and have some conversation around the successes, challenges, and tensions around this teaching. The successes were very clear, and it was discussed that there's an increasing student interest in sustainability in courses and in learning. So things like the pathway programs and community engaged learning really do support sustainability understandings for students. Although many of the challenges and tensions I think were recognized. So for example, some of the major challenges is how do we embed some of these pedagogies that we know are important, like community engaged learning or about relational building, in courses that are on a semester schedule and perhaps have large numbers of students, let's say classes of 300 or more students. It can be quite challenging. There's also a difficulty sometimes with assessment and some of these clashing understandings about what assessment might look like for concepts like sustainability. And of course, addressing the challenges of student mental health, looking at climate crisis and climate anxiety, and how do we as educators really support students as they're working through this. And the underlying tensions, sometimes we recognize that sustainability fundamentally is challenging within an institution, and Hilary made a mention of this earlier, just because we are working within a large scale institution. So how do we really mesh sustainability within this, or should we? I think even though that there was a discussion of challenges and tensions, I think the overarching tone isn't one of negativity, but it was a conversation of solidarity, recognizing that as educators from these different departments and faculties, we are sort of understanding that these are common challenges and that we can work together and have these conversations. And the fourth question was just about what the community of practice can do next. There was definite interest in continuing the conversation to share resources, for example, doing things like sharing teaching practices and course syllabi, and interest in some thematic workshops that might inform our understanding further. And this is where we went to developing the next sort of section. And I think I'm passing it back to Hilary to share a summary of our symposium that we held in March.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was a great summary of our first retreat day. I think you captured a lot of the key points that we sort of touched on and discussed. I will say that all of the events that we have been organizing so far, and my guess is we're going to continue to do this moving forward, have a discussion component to it, that we absolutely want to learn from experts in the field. We bring in a wide variety and diverse perspectives, but that we also always want time to talk together, to connect, to share how we're interpreting the ideas that speakers have had. And this first symposium was our first go at having sort of a keynote speaker, if you will. And we were really honored to have Dr. Nicole Bell, who is a colleague I've done work with for a number of years, come from Trent University. She's a professor there. She's also a member of the Anishinaabe Bear Clan from Kitigan-Zibi First Nation, which is in Quebec. Nicole gave 2 great talks on this symposium day, and we split those up. So we had time to sort of process and start to talk and reflect about what she had introduced us to in the first half. We had 2 guiding questions in this case for each of these, and then Nicole came back and talked again with us. Certainly in the first session, she talked a little bit about thinking as educators in terms of 7 generations before and after, which many of us have learned from Indigenous knowledge keepers in the past, is something we have not done well in the Western world in the past, and that it's something that we really need to take to heart in our teaching. She talked a little bit about how elders from certainly her First Nation and again from I think many First Nations in Canada have talked about the oral traditions that have been passed down in their communities, about the visions of the future that would come in stages. These are called the 7 Fires Prophecy, and that more recently there's been talk of an 8th fire in which Indigenous people would come forward with their knowledge and connect that with Western knowledge, what sometimes is framed as too wide seen. And from this union, a new people would emerge that would light the 8th and the final fire, and this would begin a golden age of peace and a return to sustainability. And I think for many of us, that was a really poignant sharing of those stories that Nicole gave. She also talked about learning bush literacy from the elder that she worked with in her home community. And we talked a little bit about bringing bush literacy into an urban context. But one of the things that stayed with me most from Nicole was the notion of developing spirit-to-spirit connections, that education in higher ed, and in fact at all levels of learning, really needs to think about how we can help make the shift to more sustainable forms of living. But that's got to come not just in introducing people through thinking, cognitive approaches to learning, but also through what Nicole called heart shifts. And to me, this is reaching out to our affective dimensions as humans, and that's affective with an A, not with an E, our emotional sides. And we haven't done that well in the academy in the past, and it's something we need to tend to more carefully. In the second half of Nicole's speech, she shared the creation story from her community, from Elder Edward Benton Benai, and it was a lovely, moving tribute to notions of the creation story. I think that affected many of us. From these two guiding questions, there were many rich conversations in breakout rooms that there's no way I can possibly summarize. But I will just say that in relationship to that first question of how we can create, foster, and build relationships with the natural world in our courses and classrooms, a couple of things stood out for me from a summary of notes that was taken. One is that we really need to give careful thought on how we're going to decentralize Eurocentric perspectives and pedagogies in our courses. And this is tough. Our university is being built on a Eurocentric model of teaching, that we need to make spaces for Indigenous knowledge and pedagogies from here in Canada, absolutely, but from Indigenous ways of knowing from around the world. Part of this is learning to be present and learning to be with and learn alongside and from the land. And again, that is not something we do well when we're locked inside our U of T classrooms. Part of that is reflecting on the colonial logic of educational spaces. They have not been set up to connect well with the real world or with the land. And that we need to be really mindful about how these educational spaces, in fact, impact on our pedagogy, and that these really limit our notions of moving towards reconciliation in many ways if we choose to stay inside these traditional sort of lecture spaces. And that we need to demonstrate respect and honor for the natural world. Certainly that can begin with a land acknowledgement, but it can't end there. It needs to go far beyond that. We need to build relationships with the natural world that we are part of, not separate from. And part of that can be recognizing the importance of Indigenous knowledge, of language, and of naming in the urban spaces in which we live and are surrounded by at U of T. In relationship to the second question, we are contemplating the Anishinaabe teaching that human beings came last in the order of creation, and that was part of the creation story that Nicole shared with us. It was getting people to think a little bit about our responsibilities as human beings to the natural world and how we can actualize those in post-secondary education. Some of the conversations that came out of that was challenging this notion of the binary, of human and nature somehow being distinct. They are not. We are part of the natural world. We are not distinct from it. And also thinking about the binary of nature and urban, that these should not be positioned as opposites, but as part of a continuity of natural and built spaces that can work in better balance together. So we also thought a little bit about how we can reorient our courses to highlight reciprocity with the natural world, thinking a little bit more about mutual responsibility and cooperation as part of that, rather than traditional notions of sustainability that are talked about in, traditional notions of stewardship that are talked about in sustainability, which really positions a hierarchical, human-centered relationship with the natural world that we need to move away from. So those were some of the key concepts that were raised that day. Again, I wish I could summarize it all. That's really hard to do, and there's separate breakout rooms going. But we are looking forward to continuing these symposiums, and our next one coming up will be in May, and I think Michael's going to talk a little bit about that moving forward. But at this point, what we'd like to do, we had promised to do as part of this webinar, is to engage you in conversation. Oh, I didn't forget to mention this. Thank you so much, Michael, for moving it onwards. We had a graphic designer join us, an artist join us for the day, Patricia, who did a wonderful job of capturing the conversations in a very different way than the way I've just summarized with you. And we hope to do one of these graphic summaries every time we have a symposium to capture our thoughts and share them in alternative modalities. So this is the first one that we've shared, and this will be, this actually went out this morning to anybody who had registered for that particular symposium. We're in the process of getting a webpage together, and it will house the summaries of all of these symposia that we hold, as well as these graphic images as well, graphic notes as we go along. Thank you, Michael, for that reminder. So we had promised to engage you in conversation today, and that's what we'd like to do next. We've got about 30 people or so in the room, and so I think that probably affords us the opportunity just to stay together in the main space. But we would like to address this conversation, this topic to you. How can this COP best support the shift to transformative approaches to sustainability pedagogy across U of T? And there's a couple of different ways we can get you involved. I'm going to suggest actually that we pop that question, folks, into the chat. Maybe Sarah, if you could do that for us. And then, thank you, take the screen share off. And I'm going to ask even if we can take the focus off on the presenters so that we can see everybody who's in the room. We are being recorded today. If you don't want to be recorded, please just leave your camera off, but we'd still love to hear your voices. And what we'd like to, thank you, Sarah has now popped the question into the chat, is how can we support you with this COP? Are there practices, are there questions, are there topics that you would like to see addressed that would help you continue to develop your own thinking on sustainability pedagogy moving forward? So I'm going to turn open the floor, and we'd love to hear your voices as part of that. If you want to put your hands up, we can address people's comments in order of hands going up. But we also invite you to pop your comments into the chat, or even better, into the Jamboard that we've set up. And the Jamboard will allow us to really capture your comments so we can take them forward to our planning meetings in future. So, responses to our question. I'll turn it over to people in the room. And thank you, Sarah's just popped the Jamboard link up for you too, if you want to pop open the Jamboard and consider adding your comments with a sticky note. Sticky note little icon is on the left-hand toolbar of the Jamboard if you haven't used that before. Oh, and see, maybe we should go to breakout rooms. People are always very bashful in a recorded session to put their comments in for questions. John, I know, Robinson, I know you probably have some thoughts on this question. Do you want to share those with us?
Thanks, Hillary. Yeah, I was actually just thinking about the difference about what transformative pedagogy means in different fields. And so, for example, what is going on in engineering? Engineering, I've learned, I'm not in that faculty, is doing all kinds of really cool stuff around sustainability, but I suspect they take a somewhat different stance on the concept itself, for example. But in terms of pedagogy, there's a lot of very cool stuff. For example, all 1,000 first-year engineering students do an ESP program where they're put into groups of 4 and put out into the community on applied projects. So if we talk about experiential learning, it's actually a requirement of all first-year students in engineering, and they all have capstones in the different engineering departments. A very substantial proportion of the first-year ESP projects and the capstones are on sustainability related topics. But so in a sense, that's experiential learning, but it might be a different way of thinking about sustainability. And then if we turn to other faculties, the same might be also true. I'm interested, for example, in where design, in both architecture and engineering, design is a fundamental concept in pedagogy. And the whole studio idea in architecture, for example, is a particular way of thinking about teaching and learning. So I just wonder if we can cast our net very widely and start to look at how different sort of areas and fields approach transformative pedagogy. It may be even possible to think of compiling, some information on different ways of approaching that. That might be interesting. I think it'd be very fruitful to have a discussion about what do we mean by sustainability that is actually cross-divisional. You know, the sort of critical social science and humanities approach, I think, has been missing from a lot of the sustainability literature. And so, you know, that should be brought to the table, especially the humanities side, I think. But I feel it's crucial that we be as broad as we can be across the whole community of scholars and teachers at the university.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. I think how we would define transformative learning at OISE would be very different. And Maria Van Bels might like to speak to that. Maria's got her hand up.
Thanks, Hillary. So one of the things I've been focusing on in my own dissertation is about transformative pedagogies that support youth and planetary well-being in this time of crisis. And when we think about transformation and transformative learning, it really is learning that prompts a very deep shift in consciousness in some way. So whenever someone has a transformative learning experience, the way that they thought about something or experienced the world goes through a profound change. And I think when we're looking at the current crisis, there are some things we can begin to identify as having been promoted through our education system that we actually need to disrupt. So individualism and the overemphasis on the individual, extractivism and a mindset of extractivism and human centrism. So when we start to really pull at some of the ways that education, especially in the West, has actually perpetuated an ecological crisis, when we're looking at transformative learning, I think we want to be very intentional about some of the ways in which we actually have to participate in a shift. And Hillary mentioned one of them earlier around bringing the affect, the emotions, the spirit, being rooted in a deep sense of interconnection. That's not been a priority of our education system to nurture that kind of a consciousness. And so more holistic, integrated approaches, which can also come through, I think what John was saying, the experiential, as well as, you know, real world problem solving. But I think that interrupting some of the mindsets is really, really critical to deep transformative learning.
Thank you very much, Maria. You're absolutely right. We're lucky to have you continuing the work of the Transformative Learning Center at OISE. We've just lost Ed O'Sullivan recently, who's just passed, who was one of the really amazing leaders of that group. So I'm thrilled that you're going to be continuing on his traditions and building on them moving forward, which is great. Can I ask if anybody else would like to contribute an answer to this question? How can we support you? We're interested in really ensuring that we're supporting the needs of faculty and engaging students in these questions as well across all three campuses. Romelia?
Yes, thanks, Hillary. Wonderful explanation, Maria. I just loved it, what you said. For me, and I also raised this when we talk about pedagogy and transformative learning, it comes down to student number, and I did raise that as well. If I'm teaching 500 students, how do we integrate that conscious learning? How do we move from assembly line education that we offer to 500 students with very strict guidelines, because 12 weeks and they're out. So it comes down to student numbers as well in courses. So that's one thing that we need to discuss, is how to engage students in a more kind of limited classroom. And so that's the support I would want.
Thank you, Romelia. And you're absolutely right. The structures that are put in place by the institution are not necessarily working in our favor. In fact, they're working quite counter to what we'd like to move towards. And so, you know, that's going to be one of the big discussion points. Are there things that we can bring forward to the CECCS to ask them to help to deal with some of these structural, these structural pieces, these systemic pieces that are limiting our ability to do this work well? Did anybody else want to? Thanks for comments on the Jamboard. No doubt that experiential learning and outdoor learning are, I think, central to this process. If we want students to learn a relationship with the land, we need to get them out on it. I'm actually experimenting with that myself this spring. I teach a graduate course in environmental and sustainability ed, which has always had experiential components, but I'm going to try taking the entire course out on the land this time, which is a big stretch for me. I've taken inspiration from Andrea Most in literature department, who's been experimenting with that in her literature courses. So I think there's a movement afoot, quite literally, to get students outside the doors of our buildings and out onto the land to learn from them. Janaya?
Hi, everyone. I love all the comments so far, and I'll quickly introduce myself and say that I'm a librarian at OISE, and I'm thinking about all of the other learning opportunities that our students have outside the classroom, outside our buildings, but also at other interactions, such as in their library workshops or at a reference desk or at a writing center and other places. So, of course, I'm interested in how library and instruction and can support and can work with the work that you all are doing. We are in a lot of classrooms, we focus on, critical information literacy, and I think that is a big part of the work that needs to happen here. So I would love to continue to learn from everyone and see how maybe we can integrate these other pieces as well into the student experience.
And I have to say that the OISE library has been very supportive. They're one of the few, I think, libraries on campus that has a seed library that is offering seeds for free that come in part from the OISE Learning Garden, but also come in part from the Toronto Seed Library, which is amazing. That's a really wonderful resource and helps to disrupt this notion of what a library can be and should be, and what kind of knowledge should be contained in it. So Janai, thanks so much for your support of that. A couple other comments that have come up on the Jamboard is that we need to encourage more cross-faculty courses. And that's a wonderful way to get into this work, because we learn so much when we teach together, when we co-teach courses together. There's no doubt that that can be part of the work for sure. And somebody else has asked for more co-curricular opportunities for students across the 3 campus. I want to put a plug in for Christy here from the CECCS, because she's been organizing a new posting system for sustainability related co-curricular learning events across all 3 campuses that will be posted up for students on the Career Learning Network site. That's just getting underway now. We're hoping by the fall that will be under really making co-curricular learning events really accessible to students across campuses. So on a sensitive time, we're at 11:50 and we had set about 45 minutes for this, this webinar. So thank you for your input. Please feel free to keep that link live to the Jamboard. We'll keep it open, and we would really welcome your continued input, and we hope your continued involvement in this COP as we proceed. Again, we'll have one more a symposium event in May. We'll be announcing that one shortly, and then we will be continuing through next year. So a huge thank you to Michael and to Nicole for finding the funding to keeping this COP going through the next year or 2.
Yeah, yeah. Clearly, we could have used a lot more time, but I think it's nice to, leave us all wanting more. So yeah, I mean, I just want to echo Hillary's thanks. So I want to thank all the panelists, of course, for their time. And on a personal note, it's been such a pleasure getting to collaborate with you. I mentioned I just started at U of T, and it's been such a warm welcome and an inspiring one. So I very much look forward to the good work ahead. The most recent intergovernmental panel on climate change report was released earlier this week, and it focuses on climate change mitigation. Now, it's nearly 3,000 pages long, so I haven't had the chance to read it all just yet, but it's clear that we have a narrow and rapidly closing window to make the kinds of fundamental changes we need in order to avoid sort of total planetary catastrophe. And this most recent report lays out a clear role for pedagogy, I think, broadly defined, in catalyzing the kinds of changes that we actually need. So I'll just quote a few lines here, if you'll indulge me very quickly. So this happens to be from chapter 5 on page 755. And if you're familiar with these reports, they include parenthetical confidence intervals. So they put after statements whether the confidence of the claim is low to very high. So this particular claim they note as being of high confidence. So they say that collective action as part of social or lifestyle movements underpins systems change. Collective action and social organizing are crucial to shift the possibility space of public policy on climate change mitigation. For example, climate strikes have given voice to youth in more than 180 countries. In other instances, mitigation policies allow the active participation of all stakeholders, resulting in building social trust, new coalitions, legitimizing change, and thus initiate a positive cycle in climate governance, capacity, and policies. So I think that this, again, is illustrative of the power of pedagogy to engage in these movements that underpin systems change. So I'm very, optimistic about, again, the power of pedagogy. And I think we all have great opportunity in front of us, but also, of course, responsibility to, to educate for change. So again, thanks to CECCS for hosting, for the thoughtful participation of the audience, and of course to Wendy Adams for her donation that makes the celebration possible in the first case. The recording of the session will be made available on the event website in the attendee hub used to access this event today. The link for that is in the chat. One final live panel as part of this series will be held this Saturday, April 9th, from 10 to 11:30 a.m. So this is a student-initiated panel organized by the Sustainable Engineers Association, and it will address ways to empower youth and involve them in the sustainable engineering community. So quite interesting. The panel will also discuss strategies to address gaps in the educational system to promote green jobs. Finally, if you have any questions or comments, please email CECCS at the email address given in the chat just right now. So thanks again. Hillary already mentioned our next event will be tentatively scheduled for May 25th, but we will be communicating widely about that once we firm up the details. And we look very much forward to seeing you all around in the coming months. Thanks very much.